Well, hey everyone, it's Angela Lauria again. Welcome to class 3 of Free Your Inner Author. So we're at about the halfway point now, and so there should be some stuff coming up for you. Maybe you haven't done your homework, or maybe you just find yourself thinking, oh my God, maybe I'm just not cut out to write a book. Maybe the timing's not right for me. And if that stuff is coming up for you, I just want you to know that means you're doing everything perfectly. You're just like all my other students. So that is how you should be feeling right now. What I find with the people that I work with is the more abstract you keep your book writing, the more it can be like this nice idea. Someday I'm going to write a book. It's like this far off fairy tale. And when you start to make it real, like we're doing with this class, what's going to come up is, wow, Angela knows the one and only way to write a book, and I can't answer her questions, or I can't do her homework, or I can't make the time to get these assignments done, and therefore maybe I'm not meant to write a book. Or it could be something like, well, if I can't pick an ideal reader, I'm not meant to write a book. Whatever is coming up right now, that's what's going to hold you back. Right? And so whether you did this work or not, that stuff was going to come up anyway. We want it to come up now. That's actually part of the process. So I get really excited when people say, oh, maybe I'm not meant to write a book, because I know once you break through that wall, your book will be written super fast. So I have heard people talking about thoughts that keep them from writing over and over again. And Seth Godin has a book. It's a really short book. It's called The Dip. And if you're in that spot, I really recommend picking this book up. Calling it a book might be even generous. It has a book cover, but it's really like a long magazine article. I don't even think it has chapters. And in this book, he talks about pushing through that dip, that hard part that most people don't push through. He says it's there for a reason, and that's where you are now. You're in the dip of writing a book. So we come in on this high, I'm going to write a book. And then you have to go through this dip to get to the other side where that book is written. So if you are feeling this way, don't worry about it. We're going to talk about some of the specifics of that feeling today, and hopefully we'll talk about how to deal with the things that are holding you back. Okay. So one of the things that comes up at this point in the process is the issue of narrowing your book topic. A lot of my students know they want to write a book, but they aren't 100% sure what they want to write about or how to pick from 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas that they have. And this process sometimes can exacerbate that and make that even harder. So let's work on that today. Go ahead and grab a piece of paper and write down for me the answers to these questions. Or actually write down the answers, and if you have time, write down the questions too. You can find these in the transcript as well. Why do you want to write a book? What's your book story? What's the story you would tell about how you came to write a book? And why are you taking this class? These are the kinds of questions I ask on my radio show, Book Journeys. I ask, did people say you should write a book? Have people said, my God, you have to write a book. You have so many crazy stories. Is that something you've said or something people have said to you? Or have you gotten positive feedback on your writing? Maybe you wrote something as small as an email or a thank you card or a Facebook post, and somebody said, wow, you're such a beautiful writer. So I want you to think about how that sort of feedback makes you feel. And just really check in with your body. Think about the last time you got a compliment on your writing and write down some notes about those feelings that came up. Is there anything that you write about where you feel like, where you feel like you lose track of time, or that a normal person would maybe even struggle to write 100 words and somehow you've written 1,000 and you're not even sure? Does that happen to you? Are there topics where you can't stop writing? Are there topics or ideas or something that you feel really compelled to share? Something you've discovered, a hard lesson for you, but where you feel like you have to tell people. Maybe you find yourself talking about something in the grocery store. Okay, where in your life have you learned your most important lessons? For me, this came through weight loss, this came through my divorce, but I've had some really important lessons. So do a timeline of your life and think about those big pivotal moments. What were the lessons that have been most helpful in your life along the timeline? Okay, and then this is kind of a cheat, but here's a shortcut to the timeline. If you ask yourself these questions, you'll start to see what those pivotal moments were. Sorry, my allergies are driving me crazy. Okay, so what lessons have helped you to break a bad habit or to lose weight? What lessons have helped you with grief, loss, a breakup? What lessons have helped you find satisfaction in your job or career or the way you earn money? What lessons have helped you form new friendships and find new tribes? So those are just a few areas to look at. Is there anything that stands out for you that is a special interest? Is there something about your career that makes it unique? Are you the first woman or the first something, whatever? Do you have hobbies? Do you have groups that you connect with in your community? I read a book once, this is still on my bookshelf, I love this book. It was called Socrates Cafe, and you can Google this and you will find it, I think on Wikipedia, there's stuff about this. But this guy loved Socrates and he loved the Socratic method. And I can't remember what the deal was. I actually remember hearing about this on NPR, and I buy a lot of books because I listen to too much NPR. I think he'd gone to law school or something where the teachers were really focused on teaching through questioning. And he had this idea that he wanted more people to use the Socratic method. And he just freaking loved the Socratic method. It was like his thing. So think about that. Do you have a thing like that that you're kind of like hot for? So he set up at the library in his town, I think it was in Minnesota, on Friday nights. After the library closed at 7 o'clock at night or something he called the Socrates Cafe. And he made coffee or bought coffee and cookies and donuts or whatever. And he invited people every Friday night to learn a new topic purely through the Socratic method. It was usually a philosophy-related topic or had some sort of current events or debate orientation to it. And this was in the town, and they grew from 3 people to 4 people to 5 people. At first it was just his friends sort of humoring him, and then there was like 100 people cramming into the library for these Socrates cafes. And what his book is a shared story of why he personally came to love the Socratic method, the story of how he came to do this project, and then all the elements of what goes into it. And his goal was to get people to set up Socrates cafes in their own town libraries. And this has happened. I actually recently looked up in prepping for this class if there were still Socrates cafes in DC, and they run through meetup groups. So the Socrates Cafe thing, it's probably 10 years old and it's still happening. That's somebody who wrote a book that matters. That's somebody who's making a difference. So he thought what was wrong with America, or that what could be improved, was talking in a more specific way that wasn't yelling or debate or what you were seeing on Crossfire or the Sunday TV shows. And he believed that worked. So this guy wrote a book, and now all around the country at libraries or wherever these kind of meetup events happen, and they changed the dialogue in communities. I think I read the book right around when the internet was kind of coming into popularity, and it was kind of like the first social networking, almost Web 2.0 idea back in the early to mid 90s. So that kind of an idea can turn from your life, something you're picking up in law school, to a powerful book to changing the world. That's what I want for you. So right now, pause the video after I say this and make a big list of all the possible topics you can write about, and just test how each one feels in your body. And try and connect with, am I on a hot track here? Is this the right direction? Just based on how you feel. When you commit to a book, you kind of marry it for the next 2, 3, 4, even more years. So with each topic, ask yourself if it will feel good to be talking about this topic, this book, in 5 years. So picture yourself, where are you going to be in 5 years? Do you still want to talk about that? See how that feels. You have a box of books in your car, and let's say you wrote a book about volunteering at zoos, which would be a great book, by the way. You could visit every zoo in America and talk to other volunteers, and you could be a speaker at their volunteer appreciation nights at every zoo in America. You're going to be doing even more zoo volunteering. You're going to get some plum assignments. You're going to be meeting a butterstick panda. I don't know. You're going to do guest volunteer days at zoos all around the world. You really have to want to live, eat, breathe, and sleep what you're going to write about. Not just for the time it takes to write it, because that is the tip of the iceberg. That's less than 10% of this process. But throughout the promotion phase, writing a book is some small percentage of time when you look overall at the life of your book. You can write the book and just put it up on the internet or something, but you're not really going to sell many copies that way, and you're certainly not going to make a difference unless you win the lottery. You need to get it out there. Does that make sense? So one of the things you can play around with is setting your writing schedule. So setting your writing ritual that we've talked about and setting your schedule. This is when I'm going to write my book, but just free write. So when you get there, let's say you make a 15-minute commitment. I'm going to write for 15 minutes twice a week. I just want you to sit down for your 15 minutes, and anything you write is fine. Whatever comes out. You can almost think of it like journaling, like whether it's more of a journaling style or a list of things that you might want to write about. But I want you to schedule some writing time this week, at least 2 15-minute appointments, and see what you write about. Okay, by delegating this time as kind of sacred book writing time, and it's like what we're doing with your book basket, right? By putting your book basket somewhere visual that you bump into, and if you see something that tugs on you, you put it in there, even if it's an empty basket. It's a reminder to your subconscious, to your right brain, that, oh, I'm on the lookout for things. I'm writing a book. So I want you to do the same thing with your book ritual, which you practice this week, and setting at least 2 15-minute appointments this week to just do some free writing and see what those topics are. That's going to be another clue about what your book is about if you haven't really honed in on it. So doing some of these exercises and trusting that the book you are supposed to write is going to come to you, that you'll notice a theme. Like, let's say you have 2 15-minute sessions where you're just writing and you don't know what you're writing about. You might notice they're on the same theme, and you might decide, well, let me see if I can keep writing on this theme. You might add a third 15-minute session. And if you try the next time and you can't write on that theme, maybe that's not your book. But all you've lost is 45 minutes at most, probably less, right? So most people do this the opposite way. Most people start with their book idea. I'm going to write about self-love. And then they just start writing. Like, writing is the first thing that's going to work. But a lot of times they get stuck. And then they start trying to force it into a book, right? And they're like jamming what they can write in. And maybe they don't have a whole book. Maybe they just have a magazine article, or maybe they have a blog post. But trying to force it into a book, that feeling, that energy of force, that resistance, that's what causes writer's block. So in your case, how I want you to be different, how I want you to free your inner author, is I just want you to be open to, hey, I want to write a book. I'm open to what I'm writing about. And here's when I'm writing my book. I'm writing my book from 9 a.m. to 9:15 on Tuesday and Thursday. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing, and I have no idea what I'm going to write. And just be open to themes or what feels good. So it's a little counterintuitive. This writing may or may not ever end up in your book, but we're just asking the book to present itself, the right book that you're supposed to write right now. I think having the conversation with other people, maybe your book buddy, or if you're thinking about, the zoo volunteer book, whoever those people are in that circle, put it out there. Put it out there with your friends. I'm thinking of writing a book about, being a zoo volunteer, and see what kind of feedback you get. But also be listening to how you feel in your body. So I like these projects. So if you say, I'm thinking of doing a year-long project, here are some ones I like. I'm thinking about writing a book. I haven't honed in on the topic, but this is what I'm kicking around. If you put it out there, these are sometimes like vehicles for communication. So if people have an idea, just kind of see where it sits in your body. And sometimes if you have an idea and somebody says no, that actually makes it even more clear it's the right idea. It's like flipping a coin and then being disappointed with the outcome. So listen, I listen for the subtleties in the messages. If you hear the same kind of feedback a few times, I would definitely take that as a message too. Okay, let's say you have a coaching business. Maybe you do executive coaching at the business level. You need to ask yourself before you settle on a topic, are you trying to grow that business or are you trying to scale that business? Would you like more passive income, more people buying products and books or whatever? Do you have an email list, like a mailing list? My strong recommendation, unless it makes you really unhappy, but if the ultimate goal is more passive income, which it is for many of my clients, selling more products and running coaching groups and things like that, I would find a very specific problem that you solve. Something people search for on Google already. This is the key. This is the most important thing for you to look for. If people don't go to Google and type in self-love, so for marketing purposes, the subtitle of your book, maybe even the title, should include the problem statement the way someone would search for it on Google. Okay, that's really important. All right, switching topics a little bit, the next thing I want to address is the issue of how you're going to publish, because that affects your ability to make a difference with your book. So, and your topic is going to influence this as well. So there are three primary ways to publish. The most common is self-publishing. And then the most well-known is traditional or mainstream legacy publishing. That's when you get a proposal to an agent and they get it to a New York publishing company and they pay you some sort of advance money in advance of your book coming out, and then they take your book over. And then the third is some sort of hybrid, boutique, indie publishing, author-funded alternative. So really quickly, unless you're famous, and by that let me say you have a big list or a big platform, like let's say you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you're a celebrity. And I have had students like this, by the way. But if you've got 100 to 200,000 Twitter followers, at this point in the evolution of publishing, there's pretty much no reason for you to go through mainstream publishing, at least not with your first book. You may get a contract. It will take you, so the process is first you have to get an agent. So to get an agent, you have to write a proposal. It's probably going to take you, let's say, 3 months to write a proposal, maybe less, 2 weeks, 2 to 12 weeks. Then you have to send that proposal to agents. I can give you some agents' names if you need, let me know. I have a book of agents and there's some that I know. So you need to send the proposal to the agent. It usually takes about 6 months to find an agent that'll agree to work with you. And if the agent likes you, they're going to ask to see the full book. So now you have to write the whole book. So let's say that takes another 3 or 4 months. And once they've reviewed the whole book, they'll decide whether or not to represent you. So this could take a year just to get an agent fully committed to represent you. At that point, once they've brought you on and you sign the paperwork, what you agree to is to modify things to meet their needs. So what they're going to do is they're going to send you instructions for how to redo your proposal from scratch in their format or whatever. So your proposal, it's going to take you 2 to 4 months to prepare. 3 months is pretty average on the front end. And then they're basically going to rip it apart and you're going to spend 3 months doing another one. So it took us a year to get an agent. Now we've got another 3 months doing another proposal. And then they're going to pass that proposal around to publishers. And unless you have one of those big platforms I talked about, 100 to 200,000 Twitter followers, your advance is probably going to be $1,500 to $5,000. So from that point, when they find you a publisher, it's going to be about 18 months to publish your book. So when your book comes out, we're probably 2 or 3 years from today, really, realistically. And that publisher isn't going to do any marketing for you. You're still going to be doing all the marketing, everything you need to do to sell a book on your own. But now this topic, it's been 2 years since you wrote about it and you haven't been able to talk about it. So if you try to do something like, let's say somebody wants to buy 1,000 copies of your book that you published with this traditional publishing house, basically you're not going to be able to get any sort of a discount, which is going to frustrate you because you won't really be able to make any money beyond your advance. And you're going to have some challenges with your copyright and things that you can do. They might rename your book. You might not be able to use the name of your book for other programs. I have a radio show where I interview first-time authors, Book Journeys Radio, and they often talk about how they regret going with a mainstream publisher. So even well-known, well-established authors at this point, and you're probably hearing these stories in the press, they say there's definitely some nice things about having a mainstream publisher, but unless you have that platform, it's not really worth it. And even if you do, it's not really worth it because you're only going to get between 7 and 15% of the sale of each book, where with the other options, you're going to get a lot more. So I kind of want you to rule that out. If you're still thinking about it, reach out to me. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Self-publishing is basically the complete opposite. It's where you do everything yourself. You have to find a designer, figure out how to get an ISBN and an LCCN, how to get different things formatted for Kindle and iBook and Nook and Kobe and Amazon and Barnes & Noble, find a distributor. And this process will cost you between $2,000 and $5,000, depending on what you do out there. Lots of resources out there, and I'm happy to make recommendations. You can do this. You can self-publish. It's not rocket science. If you've gotten this far, you can absolutely do this work. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it in that what you do is going to come back to you. So if you price your book, let's say at $15, you're probably going to make, I would say maybe $8 or $9 instead of making $1 if you're lucky from a traditional publisher. So you will put the money in, but then you're going to get a lot more out, right? And there's also some very complicated equations that publishers run that it feels like it's to mess you up a little bit. So they'll pull out discounts and returns and all this stuff. So it's very confusing. It's hard to really even understand or get a handle on how your book's doing. So you'll have more of a finger on the pulse, right? But like I said, it is a lot of work. You can figure it out. There's tons of resources. There's tons of books. I'm happy to coach you on it or give you advice. There's many websites. But do you want to become a publisher? Do you want to learn everything about publishing? So the third way, which I would say most of the people I interview for my radio show go, is this middle ground where you work with an independent publisher or a boutique publishing house. My publishing company, Difference Press, is like this. You'll find Author House, Morgan James, Balboa Press. There's so Dog-Ear. I really like Dog-Ear. There's so many of these sort of author-funded presses, and they all work a little differently. So you want to really understand what's going on there. So many, I would say most of the business models for these boutique publishing houses are that they charge you up front, usually between $5,000 and $10,000. So if you DIY, it's between $2,000 and $5,000, but you're getting their experience and their expertise, and your book's going to look better. And then they're going to charge you a percentage of every sale on top of that, usually between 20 and 50%, depending on how much you put down up front. So you're going to give them $10,000 up front and then pay them 50% of each book. They're going to do all the work a mainstream publisher would do, but you're basically paying them instead of the publisher paying you. Now, the way we work at the Difference Press is a little bit different because we don't do any money up front. You don't have to pay as an author. We see it as a joint venture. So we just do a 50-50 rev share right down the middle. But there are lots of different models, and when you're doing a rev share like that, in our case, we have a lot of say in the marketing, and we participate in the marketing, and we give you our opinion because we've got skin in the game. So what you're thinking about for your book, I'm happy to talk to you about. There are lots of options out there. There are good experiences to be had with mainstream publishers, but you have to be a star. And the one way to be a star is if you have a self-published book, whether you DIY it or you work with a boutique publisher. If you can sell 5,000 copies in the first 6 months, and you send that book with like a sales report to a mainstream publisher, skip the agent step. That's how you'll get their attention. A lot of people don't know the numbers for books, but this might be interesting for you to know. Most of my authors sell less than 100 books a month. And they usually sell around a book a day. And my most successful author sells about 1,000 books a month. So let's say my most successful author, she probably sells about 10,000 a year. 10,000 books a year for a self-published book is huge, absolutely huge. Most self-published books sell fewer than 500 books in their lifetime. And a New York Times bestseller, now it depends on what else is going on, and if 50 Shades of Grey was just released, but if you hit it at the right time in the right season without one of those, killer kind of books, to become a New York Times bestseller, you're looking at between 35,000 and 85,000 copies sold of your book within a week. So the numbers are different than a lot of people expect. It's not millions. And when somebody's offering you an advance of $1,500, that means they think over the lifetime of your book, you're going to sell about 1,500 books. So you can tell based on the advance what the big boys think that you would sell for. What this means, and this is huge, that a self-published book to get 10,000 books a year, that's like a runaway hit. I know a lot of people want their book to become viral, or they want to have a bestseller, or they want to be invited to give a TED Talk. But just to give you a sense, those numbers are a lot of times smaller, but the positive outcomes are bigger. So let's say for easy math, you're making $10 a book, which would be on the high side, and you sell 10,000 copies. That's $100,000. That's like pie in the sky. Most people are going to be making $5,000 on their book, would be a reasonable thing. But big publishers will always talk to you if they think that they can sell more books. Remember, they're making 80 to 90% when you go to a big publisher. So if they think you can sell books, they'll talk to you. It's all about the numbers. So that's one option. Self-publish, put up the numbers, then reach out to a publisher. But I would be looking for other ways having a book can make you money. So for everybody in this class, I would say, think about self-publishing or some sort of hybrid co-publishing model, boutique publishing. If you want full control, if you want to be the one to do your cover design, if you want to do your interior design, if you want to learn how back-end distribution systems work, if you're good with technical details and setting up multiple systems and you have the time or the staff to do that, then by all means go the do-it-yourself route. You will probably save yourself some money and you'll definitely get the control you'd want. There are a lot of great sources out there that will cost you less that way, and you'll get all of your royalties. Otherwise, I'd say compare some of the options with the boutique and the indie presses. There's one boutique press, Balboa Press, that has some nice upsides. They are one of the most expensive. They may be the expensive publishing house, but you have the chance of being picked by Hay House as an author. So Balboa is owned by Hay House, and Hay House picks up their books pretty frequently. So that's a nice incentive. It's a nice way in the door. You're not going to make your money back on your book, but if you get published by Hay House, you'll make it back running conferences or other things. Morgan James is one of the big ones you might want to look at, or Author House. You can also look at Authority Publishing. So yes, there are lots out there. Definitely come ask me. I'm happy to share a copy of my contract so you can read through how I work with people and use that as a benchmark when you're looking at other options. But really, the real goal here is to love who you're working with on your book. So make sure that you get the final say in the copyright. You want that copyright, okay? That's sometimes hard to get. You want to make sure that you can use the material from the book however you want to use it. And make sure that you can afford to do bulk sales. So that means buying copies of your own book for a significantly discounted rate. So look at how much they're going to charge authors for their books. And let's say you wanted 1,000 books or 2,000 books or 3,000 books. What kind of breaks are you going to get? If you get a contract or if you're considering things and you want me to look at it, by all means reach out. You can put it in email and we can talk about it in the Q&A calls. Also, every publisher at this point, every publisher, and I don't know anyone that doesn't do this, but when they do your book, they should do a print version and they should also do a version for Kindle, iBook, iPad, iPhone, that whole thing. And also the Kobe and the Nook. So an e-reader version and a print version should be required and standard with no extra cost. We also have an audio version option, but we do charge for that. Most author-funded self-publishing projects are softcover and they're often print on demand. If you really want hardcover, it is definitely possible, but you're going to need to look a little harder for that. If you want audiobook, same thing. It's another thing you're going to have to look a little harder for and negotiate for, but it's definitely possible. You can also negotiate to keep the audiobook rights. So work with a company on the print book, but you keep the audiobooks rights. I use a company called Podiobook, P-O-D-I-O, for our audiobooks. That's who we use, and I really like them. So that's what I would say about publishing. And the other questions I just wanted to address is this one. It's about writing your book. I'm thinking, why am I telling you this now? It's a little out of context, but just write this note on a separate sheet of paper. This is just a resource for you. When it comes to writing your book, I really don't want you digging into that now. I want you to focus on answering those big questions from the beginning and thinking about how you're going to publish your book first. Because when you answer them, writing your book is just going to come so much easier to you. That said, when you get to the point of writing, when you get to the point of writing, you don't actually have to write. So if you're somebody that works more extemporaneously, or you don't like to type, or maybe you have carpal tunnel, or you prefer to write out longhand, or you can't type, whatever the things, we will get to this later, but one of the main, so I guess this is the teaser, one of the main ways I teach people to write their books and why it goes so fast is that we use audio recordings. So we're going to line everything up so that you can record your book almost in a weekend and then get the transcripts. That's how a lot of my clients write their book. You can try dictation software. I've used Dragon. Apple has dictation software built in, and if that works with you, that's great. But one of the things I do is people hire me to interview them, and we set up a whole bunch of questions for each chapter of the book. I interview them, we get a transcript, and then we take out the questions. We turn the questions into the answer. We take out the questions, and that transcript becomes a first draft of your book. So I know it feels like we're not working on the book, but I guess I just wanted to tip you off that this is going somewhere. And once you have that first draft, you can hand it off to an editor or work with it yourself with words on paper. But getting that first draft is going to be really easy if we do all this other stuff up front. So if you're worried about writing, or if you want to write longhand, but you feel like, my God, how am I going to type this thing? I do the same thing. Write it longhand and just read it and get it transcribed. When you read it, you end up proofing it, and you also get a higher level of flow. So if you're trying to hear the flow, you need to do some work on the book. That way, as you're reading it, you make a recording and you have them turn it into a transcript, and that saves you from having to type it, but it also counts as a round of editing. I guess I just wanted you to know that was coming and have it in your back pocket so you understand that picking a topic is really important, answering those questions we did at the beginning, and then thinking about what publishing route you want to go to. Also, super important, and it's going to affect your book, believe it or not. And we'll talk about that more after you start making publishing decisions. But I call that creating your masterpiece. That's actually step 10 in the difference process. So, so these two pieces are really important, and you don't need to write anything, but you need to know it will make writing that much easier. Okay, so switching gears. I want to talk about your book basket now. So I'm going to set you up for your homework this week. Some people like to do electronic book baskets. I am one of them. I'm an Excel junkie, so I do a book basket in Excel, although I do have a wicker visual basket as well. But some people have empty baskets on their desk with nothing in them. That's what I have. Every once in a while I'll throw something in there. Usually my cat is what's in there. So I'm just going to mostly write about my cat because he lays all over it. But when you're in the book basket process, and some people are thinking about doing it, but they haven't really been keeping up. They have scraps of paper in various places or a pile. But wherever you are in your book basket process, what I'd like you to do this week is find a piece of horizontal furniture, a table, a big open dining room table is really your best option. Or maybe you have a desk that you can clean off a part of, or one of those snack tables even can work. But by the way, I'm telling you to do this physically because there's something really powerful about the physical version of having the book basket. So you can do something in Excel too. I do, and I will show you some of this. You can create an Excel chart with 10 columns or however many of those main benefit statements, and then the items in each of those columns. But I want you to have a physical book because I want you to have that visual reminder again to trigger your right brain. So, okay, basically what you're going to do is you're going to take all of the materials, all of those little slugs, those little short names and stories, tools, exercises, quotes, stats, everything you think is going to go in your book. Maybe you're taking pictures with your camera, whatever you're doing, whatever you're putting in your book basket in your mind, or if you physically have one. I want you to put each of those things in a separate file. So don't like list everything on one sheet of paper. I want everything on a separate note card. And I want you to look for themes. So I want you to make piles of themes. Like if you're spending a lot of time talking about the body, that might be one theme. And so, or maybe there's empowerment, and you talk about empowerment for girls. That might be another theme. Whatever the themes are, I want you to group these objects. And I used to do this with colored highlighters or colored like sticky tabs. But whatever your piles are, I want you to combine as many of those resources into piles. So look for what's connecting them. And I know this might seem like we're doing this in reverse order, but that's why I call this an unoutline. Normally you would say, I'm going to write a book about light bulbs. And then you would think about, well, what would a book about light bulbs include? It would have to include a history of light bulbs, or the way light bulbs are made, or the way light bulbs are used, or a bio of the inventor of the light bulb. And then you would go find information on those topics, right? You'd go Google them or go to the library or whatever. And then you'd set the outline first, then go find the information. We're doing this inside out. That's why I call it an unoutline. And then we're going to layer in a top-down approach. So first we're going bottom up. We're going to look at everything in your book basket right now, and we're going to start sorting, and we're basically making the beginnings of an outline that's going to have a lot of holes. So when we see what's missing, we'll know, oh, what holes do we need to fill, instead of starting from the top down. Okay, so for this week, I want you to fill your book basket up as much as you can. Ideally, there's 100 things in this book basket. And I want you to separate them into piles. In a perfect world, 10 piles. So, and if you can't get it to 10, that's fine. Those are going to be the blanks we fill in. But each pile is going to be a chapter. So I'd love 10 piles with 10 things in each pile. Ultimately, this is what we've been working towards. Instead of trying to force an outline out, we're creating your chapters more organically. And then what's in the chapter, you may even figure out your book topic by doing this, because you've just been putting stuff in your book basket not even sure what your book is definitively about, see what themes come up. So, so here's what a typical pile might look like. Typical pile might be a benefit statement, a quote, a story, a statistic, a drawing, an anecdote, a reference from another book, an excerpt from a song, a quote, a poem, or a book, a tool, like a coaching tool. Any of those items can be in your chapter. So 10 main subjects, 10 smaller subjects under each main subject. And go check any book on your shelf and see in each chapter how many things they have. And you'll see it's about 10. So what this looks like for me in Excel, because I do this all in Excel, is there are 10 columns. Each column has a name. And then under each column, there are 10 items. And that's what I want you to do. And there's going to be blanks at the beginning, and that's fine. So the 10 columns are the 10 themes. The 10 items under each is what's in those piles. And so in each of your piles, you're going to, okay, here's what I try and do is I try and play a game of Jeopardy. So now there's 10 items under each one. And I go through each item. So let's say one of my items is a quote from the book Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck. And the quote is about losing track of time when you're doing something you love. So instead of just putting that quote there, I'll add to the quote a question that makes it almost like a game of Jeopardy. So it might be this. What's one of the ways that you know you're on a hot track when you're writing your book? And the answer is Martha's quote, right? So my answer would be one of the ways you know that you're on a hot track when you're writing your book is if you lose track of time when you're working on it. And I actually stumbled upon that when I was reading Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck. Martha Beck says, whatever she says, put the quote here. There's my quote. So for this week, what I want you to do is to go through each item in your book basket or in your scraps of paper and separate them into piles. What these piles are going to be ultimately is chapters. So I want you to aim for 10 piles. And each pile is going to be one of these themes. So ultimately, this is what we've been working towards. Instead of trying to force an outline or creating what your chapters are and then what's inside the chapters, we've been doing this from the bottom up. Ultimately, what you want for next week is 10 piles, 10 items in each piles. Here's what some of those items might be. Items might be a benefit statement, a quote, a story, a statistic, a drawing or a cartoon, an anecdote, a reference from another book, an excerpt from a song or a poem. There could be exercises. So 10 main subjects, 10 smaller topics or exercises under each subject. What this looks like in Excel for me is that there's 10 columns and each column has a name, and then under each column you see 10 items with just those short names. So that's what I want you to do. And then the next thing that's part of these piles, and we talked about this a little earlier when I was talking about the recording stuff, the next thing is that in each of your piles you're going to have 10 piles, 10 items. What I try and do is play a game of Jeopardy. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, one of the items in my book is a quote from Martha Beck's Finding Your Own North Star. And the quote is about losing track of time when you do something you love. Instead of just putting that quote in my chart, I'm going to add a question that almost makes it like a game of Jeopardy. So what's one of the ways you know you're on a hot track when you're writing your book? And then my answer would be, one of the ways you know you're on a hot track when you're writing your book is if you lose track of time when you're working on it. I actually stumbled upon that when I was reading Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck, where Martha Beck says, blah, blah, blah. And here's a quote or a summary of that part of her book or whatever. So what you're going to try and do here is by setting up the actual piece of evidence and then the question that would get you to talk about that piece of evidence or that item that you're going to put in the chapter. What you're doing is you're setting up one of those recording sessions I talked to. So you're actually going to end up with 100 questions that I could ask you or a friend could ask you. You record them, and that transcript, maybe you could even do this with your book buddy, but that transcript can use a free conference call line, work with your book buddy, take these 100 questions, and you can end up with a first draft of your book. So you're going to pre-write the questions based on what the answers are. So every item in your book basket is a Jeopardy answer, right? And you have to write the question now. So maybe the section is about, for my book, figuring out the right topic to write about. Then my book buddy might ask me questions like, what's one of the ways you know you're writing on the correct topic? And I would answer that question, like my answer is, we all take from the transcript, that becomes the rough draft version. The transcript is the rough draft of my manuscript. So to repeat all this, here's what you're gonna do. Ready? Because it's a lot. So step 1, make your piles, whatever they come out as. Step 2, you want 10 items in 10 piles. So for each item in your pile, turn the item into a question. So let's say it's a statistic, 1 out of 3 moms choose Jif. Then the item, that's the item, is 1 out of 3 moms choose Jif. The chapter is moms and peanut butter. One of your pieces of information is 1 of 3 moms choose Jif. Now you have to turn that into a question. So the question might be, I don't know, do we have any statistics on what kind of peanut butter moms like? That's the question you turn it into. That's what you're basically responding to in your writing. So whether you're recording your chapter or writing it, when it comes time to get your first draft down, you're just going to ask yourself the next question line. How do I know which peanut butter moms like? And if I ask myself that question in my head, or I have somebody ask me and I either type the answer or speak the answer, I already know the answer because those are the items in the book. So instead of having a writing session where you're staring at the blank page in front of you thinking, oh my God, what am I going to put on this blank page? You're never going to have a blank page. You're just going to have Q&A sessions. You could answer questions on this all day. So either on a recorded line or because you're typing or writing by hand, you're going to answer the questions that we come up with. So the reason you're turning them into questions is because what we're setting this up for is when it comes time to write your book, it's going to go so super fast and be so super fun to write. That's the reason why you're not writing a book now, because you're not answering the questions your reader wants to know. That's why if you wrote a book now, it wouldn't necessarily be a book that matters or a book that makes a difference. That's why you need your ideal reader and the right topic. Not only are you answering the question, you've already found the answer to the question. So, you know, the answer is, the University of Michigan study wrote this, your book is just a series of answering questions that you've already found the answers to. It's like a test you're set up to get an A on. I remember my 8th grade teacher, my 8th grade English teacher, Miss Miller, doing this. If your 8th grade English teacher says, 7 things I like about Tostitos, and they say, write a 500-word essay. You could write a 500-word essay on 7 things I like about Tostitos. But if she gave you a blank piece of paper and said, write me a 500-word essay, it was going to take a lot longer to get that essay out. That's what we call writing prompts. So that's what we're setting ourselves up for, is that each of these 10 chapters and each of these 10 segments is a 500 to 1,000-word essay with a writing prompt for your 8th grade English teacher, right? So as we move towards setting up your schedule for writing, that's your author mojo, what we'll do is we'll take these writing prompts and we'll make it an assignment. So if you're going to write every Friday at 9 a.m., then in all of those on your calendar reminders, we'll put those writing prompts. So it'll take you 100 Fridays to write a first draft of your book if we're going to do 100 writing prompts at 500 words each and you're going to write once a week. So it's going to be really easy to predict when your book will be finished and what work you have to do to get it finished and what your next writing assignment is. So the next day you know what you're going to write. That's ultimately where we're going with all this. So we're going to make it so crazy easy for you to get your book done and out of your head and into your hands, and stop saying, I want to write a book, and actually have one written. That's why all this work is happening on the front end. So it's when people start writing, they write 1 or 2 or maybe 3 chapters, and then they stop because they don't know where they're going. And that's what we're doing here. Okay, so now the most important thing is, what if you don't have all the items ready for your book basket? In a perfect world, you've got 100 items, 10 chapters, 10 piles, 10 pieces of evidence in each pile. That's going to get you about a 150-page book if you do it this way. But if you don't, you can do it 2 ways. You can go with whatever you have. Let's say you have 80% or 60%. You have 8 chapters or 6 chapters, something like that. You can just keep going. And we're going to talk about some techniques next week for filling in the gap. But if you're like, at this point I only have 2 items, 2 piles with 2 items in each pile, then I don't want you to keep going. Be at least at 60% to keep writing. So you want to pin down at least 60% of this, and then next week we're going to talk about how to fill in the gaps, okay? So one of the ways you might want to pin this down is using the approach we talked about earlier. So if I was going to write a book about knitting circles and how they can make the world a better place, then I come up with a working title and I can do the top-down method. Could I find what are 10 chapters and 10 things to say about each chapter? You can take that top-down approach, which again, it gives you something to push against. So I want you to do bottom-up and top-down, but try and come up with the 10 different main topics, 10 chapters, 10 things in each chapter in as much of an organic way as you can. That will make your book that much easier to write. If you only have 2 things to say about a topic, and the topic is like stressful for you to think about, this isn't your book. You want to tap into a book where you can have more than 10 items, more than 10 chapters, and that finding that's relatively easy. You might have 300 items and you have to whittle it down to 100. So I'm just trying to give you a benchmark here, but if you're having trouble doing this from the bottom up, it's not going to be easier if you come at it the traditional way from the top down. I promise you, it won't be easier. So we want to find a book that you can use as a template. So we talked about doing a project like the Zoo Project. Find a book like Project Everlasting. It's the story of these bachelors that discover the secrets of America's greatest marriages by going around and meeting different couples. And the bulk of this book, it's just interviews with couples that have been married 50 years or longer in different states or something. So each chapter is basically an interview. There's a setup with a little story, and then there's like another call out on their quest to, I don't know, be perfect husbands or something. And then there are maybe 3 chapters that aren't interviews, but most of the chapters are just interview transcripts. Great way to get a book done, right? So you could do that with the zoo book. Interview 10 zoo volunteers and you've got 10 chapters almost done. But you want to think about what you're going to ask them and all that stuff. But you put interviews in as placeholders. We can clean that up later. But find a book you like that you can look at what's in each chapter, right? Do they have a stat? Do they have a story? What do they have? And try and look at form over content. That's going to give you some ideas for your actual book or your project. Big goal this week, get your chapter piles in place. Get as close to 10 as you can, at least 6. I'd like to see 8 from everybody. Take as much as you can from your book basket, and then layer on top of that with the traditional left brain, doing a book outline, 10 chapters, 10 items in each chapter. That's your mission for this week. Remember to keep using your writer's ritual. That's going to help you when you get into the writing part. And remember that the emotions you put into your book are the emotions that come out. So if you're feeling stressed or uncomfortable or like you have the wrong topic or you haven't nailed it yet, I want you to give yourself a break, because that's where you're supposed to be right now in this process. Spend time making sure you're happy with the topic you have and spend time getting the 10 chapter piles. No, it's an iterative process, and staying vague is perfectly fine. We don't have to nail all of this down, but you'll start to see how it bubbles up if you can relax and give yourself a little more credit for hanging with this process. I know it can be scary, but ultimately it's going to get you a better book, and a book that makes a bigger difference. And that's why we're here, because together we can change the world, one book at a time.